You know, Sonic has been killing it recently. Sonic Frontiers was great, despite admittedly having many rough patches, and its final update just dropped, giving us one of the best bosses in the series. Add on to that Sonic Origins being a pretty good collection overall, and you can see why people are anticipating the release of Sonic Superstars. And then it leaked. Off to a great start. Nonetheless, Sonic Superstars officially made its way into our hands on October 17th, 2023, and we are finally ready to explore the North Star Islands for ourselves. This game is made by Arzest, infamously known for the development of Yuji Naka's masterpiece, Balan Wonderworld. You know, maybe it's a good thing like it. Like many, this had me worried for how the game would turn out, but luckily, Arzest was working alongside Sonic Team to ensure its quality. Starting off with the game's visuals, Sonic Superstars unfortunately ditches Sonic Mania's pixel art, replacing it with this much cleaner aesthetic using 3D models. It's kind of like the new Super Mario Bros. Series if it was less flat, and honestly, it looks good. While I do prefer the pixel art, this look is aesthetically pleasing. It's vibrant, well animated, and I imagine would draw casual players' attention to the game rather than having them dismiss it because it doesn't look modern. The developers never get lazy with it either. The game experiments with them in some stages, such as Cyberstation's voxels for the players and enemy models, or how the stage rebuilds itself in Egg Fortress Zone Act 2. But they also never reach the heights of something like Rayman Legends with how visually interesting that game gets, instead opting to remain more consistent in its environments, which can make some zones like Press Factory Act 1 very boring visually, but those are just nitpicks, because otherwise, I think the game looks great, a far cry from the Sonic 4 games, especially Episode 1. More importantly though, is how does the game feel, and I'm glad to say, the physics for the most part feel just fine. Before the game released, we got confirmation from Christian Whitehead, Sonic Mania's creative director, that Mania's physics had been ported over to 3D for Sonic Superstars, and while that is mostly true, it's not a one-to-one translation, which affects Knuckles in an unexpected way. Before we get to that though, let's discuss the characters overall. Of course, Sonic plays as he always has in the classic games, with the addition of the drop dash making its way over from Mania. In fact, all of the characters have an extra ability when holding the jump button in midair. Tails has his flight, and I love its animation. It reminds me of the Sonic Adventure opening for some reason. Knuckles has his gliding, which is where my only complaint with the physics shows up. In the classic games at Mania, Knuckles gains speed while gliding. However, this is absent from Superstars, and while you'll rarely glide long enough to notice it given the zone's new focus on verticality, it can still feel sluggish and slow when you do. This problem also affects Amy's hammer attack, with it giving you a boost of speed in Origins Plus, but not here for some reason. It's hardly a deal breaker, and I still think that all the characters are fun to play as, but it's still weird. What's also a bit weird is the zone's level design. I wasn't expecting it, but some stages can be long. Like about 5 minutes just playing through them while ignoring the special rings long. Granted, some of that is because of the boss fights, and we'll get to that, but for now, just focusing on the level design and themes, I love these zones. All of them are original, which is a massive step up from the recent games, and the level design for the first 2/3 of the game I think is fantastic. It has its issues, especially structure-wise, seeing as some zones only have one act, which is a shame really, because one of my favorite zones, Sand Sanctuary, is one of them, while others have 3 acts, one of them being an optional character exclusive act making use of their abilities. They employ fun gimmicks like the roller coaster in Pinball Carnival Act 2, the grinding in Speed Jungle, Sky Temple's Wind, and much more. You access levels through a hub world this time. It's kind of like Sonic Generations in that aspect, but on a much smaller scale. This is also where you can switch characters. Yeah, unlike the classics and even Mania, you don't have to create a new save file for each character. You can just change them in the hub world without losing your progress. Sadly, this also means that not every level is designed around all the characters' abilities, aside from the exclusive acts of course. After the first 2/3 of the game though, the quality of the levels dip in a massive way, as a difficulty spike comes out of nowhere and the game becomes a lot less fun because of it. This is the second time the Sonic community is having the difficulty conversation in less than a month. Does Sonic Team hate us? And what sucks about it is while the level design remains entertaining, albeit less than before, it's really the boss fights that drag them down. Like sure, I may think that Cyberstation is one of the most fun stages in the game, but I also associate it with the return of the fights where you run away from the boss waiting for an opportunity to hit it. And while that did happen in Sonic 3 and Mania Plus, the difference there is that in those fights, the boss was always open to attacks, you just had to time them right. Whereas here, they take the Sonic Rush approach of having you damage the boss and then waiting for a lengthy attack cycle to finish before going in for another hit. Not for the Piggy Bang though, it gets a special treatment. What makes it worse is while this is fun during the beginning of the game, later on, the game introduces fights with 2 phases, and here's the problem. there are no checkpoints, meaning that if you die in the second phase of a boss, you'll have to replay the first phase as well, with all the waiting involved there. This is why some levels take so long. While some are just long stages, which is welcome, others are extended by minutes-long boss fights to the point where it's sometimes better not to go in a supersonic because it wastes too many rings when you're not attacking. The final boss of the main story is the worst example of this, with long, drawn-out attacks in the first phase and being generally unpredictable in the second, leading to many retries. Sonic Superstars introduces a new purpose to the Chaos Emeralds. Hidden zones are giant rings that take you to special stages to acquire them. Once the emerald is yours, you unlock new power. Collect all 7, and you unlock Supersonic. These are probably the easiest special stages in the series, and for good reason. The powers you unlock can be really useful for finding shortcuts or metal hunting, and Sega probably wanted everyone to try them out. It's not exactly like how it was in Sonic 3 though. Unlike that game where every special ring leads you to a new emerald, in Superstars, you're limited to 1 emerald per zone, so not all powers can be used by Zone 3. I'm not exactly a fan of this decision, but I completely understand why it was implemented. Nonetheless, the powers more than make up for it, because a few of them can completely change how you play while they're active. It's also a great driver for replayability, as they can change up how you play earlier zones. My personal favorite is the bullet, acting like the burst wisp, allowing you to gain insane height and distance. There are some more situational ones, like vision, where you'll basically only use it when the game highlights it for you. They refill at checkpoints, and they can make the boss fights a lot less of a pain. What is a pain though is how they massacred the soundtrack. That's like the one thing you don't do in a Sonic game. For all the shade I throw at Forces, it at least still had a good soundtrack. This game has 4 composers. T. Lopes, who previously did the music for Sonic Mania, Rentaro Soma, who worked on some cyberspace tracks and Frontiers, Hidenori Shoji, who worked on the Monkey Ball games, and Jun Snoy, who composed music for Sonic Adventure 2. Do you wanna know what else he composed music for? The Sonic 4 games. And it's here where my problem lies. Whereas the rest of the composers have phenomenal tracks in the OST, Jun returns to Sonic 4 instruments. And while this can lead to some good stuff, such as Ridge Island Zone Act 2 sounding great, it also results in some of the most forgettable tracks in the game. And that's really the word to describe the soundtrack as a whole. Forgettable. Like, don't get me wrong, while a few songs stick out and surpass even Mania, this doesn't describe the OST in its entirety. Songs like Press Factory Act 2 are 40-second loops with instruments that sound straight out Sonic 4 Episode 2. But in the same game, Sand Sanctuary Zone, which is some of T-Lope's best work, making this the most mixed I've ever been on a Sonic OST. Seriously, Sega, get this man off the sins and back to his guitar. And while those are all the points I want to cover about the game's story mode, there is some post-game content that we need to talk about. And while it's not really a spoiler by now, I feel like it's warranted to put a spoiler warning if you haven't played or don't know what happens after the main story. All good? Alright, I love Trip's story. If you don't know, Trip, Eggman's new robot, turns out not to be a robot at all. During this reveal, she has a dragon super form that she uses to destroy a fang-shaped mech. After the conclusion of the game, Trip's story is unlocked, acting as this game's hard mode and also New Game Plus. And while I found the difficulty to be an issue in the latter half of the main game, I think what makes me excuse it for Trip's story is the fact that she has new level design that makes use of her abilities, which are basically a mix of Amy and Knuckles with a double jump and climbing. Except you can also climb sloped surfaces, and she's honestly just really fun to play as. Moreover, you actually get to play as the dragon super form, and it breaks the game in half, making most boss fights a non-issue. However, the bosses are still my main complaint about this mode, because they take more hits than the original in an attempt to artificially make them harder. The Snow Zone boss being the worst example of this, as it goes from a pretty easy and fun boss to one of the most grueling challenges in this game. Not all bosses are bad, however. I actually enjoyed the fight with Fang's mech. It's a huge improvement to the original fight, with way snappier attacks and a consistent way to dodge them. The only thing I don't like about this fight are the instant death attacks, which admittedly did only get me once, but that doesn't excuse their presence. After beating Trip's story, you unlock the last story, which is just your typical supersonic boss, but it comes out of nowhere just for the fight. I think the game tries to explain it in one of the cutscenes, but it came as a complete surprise for me. It's not too hard, definitely harder than something like Doomsday Zone, but you can finish it pretty easily. And then it's Sonic Superstars. Overall, I honestly loved this game. For all the complaining I've done, I still think it's a really solid package, despite still believing that Mania is the king of the classic games. That being said, I also believe that Superstars will be a bit divisive. That's nothing new for Sonic, I know, but it's been so long since we've had a Sonic game that was loved by everyone. This game is similar to Frontiers in the aspect that, with a bit more polish, we could have had something truly exceptional. And while I loved my time with it, it still has some major flaws that need to be ironed out in the next game. And the $60 price tag is just a bit too much. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video. It's been a while since the last one, and I'm hoping I didn't lose my touch. Let me know what you thought of Sonic Superstars down in the comments, as I'm genuinely curious, and have a great rest of your day, and goodbye.